Morning all. I found a very interesting historical game of Magnus Carlsen when he was just 12 years old. It was in the Politan Cup of 2003, played in Copenhagen, and his opponent was Hans K. Herstedt. Okay, so Magnus kicked off with e4, and Hans played e5. After knight f3, knight c6, we see a Roy Lopez. Magnus retreats the bishop, most standard move rather than the exchange variation. After castles b5 here, now bishop e7. After rook e1, black plays d6. So no Marshall Gambit or anything here is planned, just d6. So c3 now, and black castles. After h3, black plays knight a5. It's all standard kind of moves so far. Black is often stretching on the queen side with c5 after moving this knight, and indeed that's what happens here. c5, d4, queen c7. Magnus proceeds with knight bd2. Black encourages now the closing of the centre with knight c6. Now often this move is a little bit controversial sometimes, because black later can just move that knight back and maybe use the c5 square. So sometimes players keep the tension here. Magnus chooses to play d5 here though. And now a4, rook a7, indirectly now protecting the rook. So that ab, queen is protecting the rook. Knight f1, the knight ventures maybe on a journey, usually to g3 or e3 and eyeing f5. g6, weakening some dark squares, but discouraging this journey in advance for a knight to come to f5. And also maybe g6 could be useful for a later f5 from black. For the moment though, the bishop kicks the rook on f8 to e8, and now knight g3. Okay, after knight d7, Magnus now plays knight h2. With this space advantage here, it seems easier for white to try and play on the king side for the moment. Black battens down the hatches with f6, possibly against f4, so it seems black's preparing for the worst. Bishop e3 takes the bishop out of the opponent's territory, back in territory, and maybe the idea now is f4 and maybe f5 potentially. Okay, it also means that on the other side of the board, b4 might also be painful for black at some point for this diagonal here. So it's keeping some flexibility by doing that retreat. Knight b6, is the bishop a target for knight c4s now? Well, actually, a takes b5 is played. A takes b5, and bishop d3 covers that c4 square, and not minding an exchange of rooks here. Black plays bishop d7, and now queen d2. Okay. Knight f7. So that's 1 point. If the bishop had remained on h6, it would have been a target anyway for that knight coming to f7. White takes on a7 now and plays queen e2, targeting b5. Black protects b5, so it's sort of these pieces are quite flexible, it seems. The knights are ready to pounce on the king side. Knight g4. Okay, knight h6 needs to be considered now by black. Black covers up the h6 square with king g7, and then we see bishop c1, which protects b2, maybe prophylaxis against the queen invasion, or knight a4s or knight c4s, that the b2 pawn is not so vulnerable. Knight a4 is played here, attacking b2 anyway. Then we see bishop c2. Okay, rook a8. And now queen e3 looks like a strange battery. You usually want your bishop in front of the queen, not the queen pointing at a square which is already protected by the knight. So you might think this is quite strange to play queen e3. On the other hand, knight h6 could drive away the defensive knight for a moment. So that's to be taken into account. So c4 is played here. And now rook f1, indicating that maybe an access route to the king will be the f pawn, or maybe even f5. So these options of using the f pawn, black has basically released some of the tension with that c4 pawn move. So giving white a potentially freer hand. But is black trying to make use of c5 in this position, or reroute the bishop? Is it dangerous to reroute the bishop? Is the bishop needed defensively? Knight c5 makes use of that dark square. Now knight h6 drives away the defensive knight somewhere. It goes aggressively though into near white's position with knight g5, eyeing h3 as well. Now here, interestingly, Magnus plays f4, and after e takes, he doesn't play rook takes f4 here. He plays queen takes f4, which seems to be setting himself up for a cheap tactic, which black plays, a cheapo tactic. Bishop takes h3, with the idea that now, if g takes, of course, there'll be a knight fork, which would be very embarrassing for the 12-year-old. But the 12-year-old has something in mind here, a beautiful conception, actually. A very beautiful conception from this position. Getting a lot of new access routes open to the black king. And it starts off with the move queen h4. So this pawn sacrifice, what has it gained? Well, it's gained time here to start off with, because queen on h4 is protecting now the knight, and bishop takes g5 seems to be threatened now with queen takes, holding on to the knight. So the bishop scurries back to d7. And now we see a kind of Penrose versus Tao situation, where Penrose spectacularly defeated Tao in one of the Olympiads with a thematic break in the centre, and namely e5. It looks a little bit like that. Look at these bishops down at black's king side. Look at g5, g6. There's a lot of scrutiny being placed, in fact, on the black king side after this move, and that scrutiny is about to increase greatly. So black clearly cannot take here, otherwise bishop takes g5, so he tries the other pawn. Okay, now can you guess what Magnus plays in this position if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay, you want to rip open these lines like this diagonal. He plays, on the first course, is knight h5 check. So he sacrifices knight, a bit Talesque here. And you might wonder what the exact purpose is. And so did black. And it would seem unwise to do anything apart from take this knight. Stepping in with the king doesn't seem such a hot idea, because, for example, and without checking this with engine at this point, the discovered check here seems a bit lethal with bishop takes g5, holding on to f6 seems very damaging. But we'll check in the second pass various possibilities. Here black took on h5, wondering what would be next. And can you guess what Magnus played in this position? So you might want to pause the video or just take 10 seconds to guess. So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay. Magnus plays queen takes g5. Check. Queen sacrifice. Not too many possibilities for black here, other than to accept. If king f8, then surely queen g8 is mate. If king h8, then surely knight f7 is mate. So can't really be declined here, it would seem. So black takes that, and now another forcing move with check, rook f7 check, and it doesn't matter where the king goes now. It took on h6. If it goes to h8, there's a similar ending, and here the game ended with rook takes h7 mate. A beautiful game for Magnus when he was just 12, rated on the FIDE rating scale just 2385, which is pretty high for a 12-year-old. 2385, not bad. Better than most club players' FIDE ratings, I think. So his opponent, Hans, was 2249, and so was blown away in the Roy Lopez.